Hi, I'm Lisa Gorton from Australian Book Review, and this is Michael Sharkey, the new editor of the Australian Poetry Journal. We're celebrating the launch of the new issue tonight. There is Kent MacCarter, editor of Cordite Poetry Review, and here, the elegant-looking man with the dark glasses. And Fiona Wright is also here. She's the poetry editor of Seizure. And Michelle Cahill, who's the editor of Mascara Literary Review. So this is an online conversation. We'll be taking Twitter questions too, just like Tony Jones. And we're really here to celebrate the launch of the Australian Poetry Journal and also, tease out what we think we do as poetry editors. So Michael, to start with you, the star, there's a certain promise in that title, Australian Poetry Journal. How do you understand that promise or responsibility?
Well, it's the first thing you go to when you type Australian poetry into a search engine is to come up with Australian Poetry Organisation, and as you start trolling around there, you come up with Australian Poetry Journal. So it's a question of responsibility indeed, you know, a sense of prestige. I've inherited something that I have to keep up, and the idea is that it's representing Australian poetry in general. It's not representing a particular type of poetry or a particular demographic, and that makes it very difficult because a lot of journals have a pitch towards a younger catchment area, and others may inadvertently look for a more conservative audience or an academic one. This is none of the above, in a sense. It's really looking to represent people from Northern Territory, from Tasmania, remote parts of interior parts of states. And so it's not a city magazine as such. And this is one of the things I have to be wary of in choosing poetry, that it does, in fact, become representative, transnational, transgenerational, and all sorts of things. You know, to look for poetry that could stand up anywhere against certain other journals, which may be available online. They all have different ideas. This is perhaps unusual because it's looking increasingly like being the one print journal in Australia totally given to poetry, which has such an ambit claim to be Australian poetry. You know, you go online and you can find American poetry, Canadian poetry, French poetry, and all sorts of things, New Zealand Electronic Poetry Centre and things like that. So I'm alert to the fact that this is a print journal. There's certain things associated with that. A lot of people would prefer to read poetry privately, and so I've got to cater to that. Others would like to read the text of something that's basically performance or whatever. We hope to cover that in the online version, having more multimedia things. I don't pretend that we're up there in that respect with journals that are older and been doing that sort of thing longer, like Cordite and my erudite companion here, Kent MacCarter. We'll talk about that and what sort of things. Exciting things are available online. Other people, perhaps like Eleanor Jackson, could talk about what happens with things like Peril magazine, or Michelle Cahill will tell you what happens with a particular kind of representation of poetry and a particular audience maybe that she's pitching for in something like her magazine. But I don't want to sort of try to hone in on any territory. But it's a very responsible thing, you know, to cover such a large catchment. Yeah. I don't want it to be bush ballads. I don't want it to be all performance, you know. It's, bush ballad really appealed to me. I could be persuaded to say, look, there are better places, but
yeah. You do have, and at the same time, you're representing all these different places and generations and styles. But there's also the matter of your own personal taste. And I'm wondering, before we get to that, actually, what we can say to remember Bronwyn Lee's role as editor, because I know that you agree that she did a great job of establishing the journal.
Yeah. I think Bronwyn's speech was rather different from mine in certain respects. I won't go into all the differences, but I do fancy poetry that appeals to the imagination and to the intellect. I like poetry that's sort of brief, concise, which is not to say I don't like a long poem that can also have many flashy moments, but I want poetry that really sort of surprises you in various ways. I like wit, a certain amount of intelligence to shine through, and I like poems that evidence wide reading. It's a terrible thing to say, isn't it? But I like poems that will appeal to readers who are fairly sophisticated. Maybe that's my not exactly so hidden agenda, that I'm looking for poems which may be appealing to people who really love Shelley, Keats, Shakespeare, Johnson, all sorts of contemporary American, Czech, Polish, Russian poets, and who do read widely. I'm aware of the fact that in certain country towns your local library may not have a wide range of these, but you could be lucky, as I was in a remote inland city in Australia, to have a fantastic library, a great librarian who is passionate about poetry. I go in there and say, hey, have you got the latest thing by Anne Knoston, which is a kind of fold-out thing? He said, I've got to get that for you. And this was really good. But a lot of people don't have that if they live in Thargomindah or remote New South Wales or Western Australia. They may not have that experience. There'd be no bookshop that sells poetry. I hope that the Australian Poetry Journal may whet the appetite of people like that to look beyond what's familiar.
And with this Australian Poetry Journal, you've got the print book that you've been talking about. You're also going to develop an e-book and a website. So I'm wondering how you see those different areas interacting, or do you see them separate?
I see them as all complementary. I see the e-book version as constituting pretty much what's in the print version with added supplements, added hormones or whatever it happens to be. I just wanted to have more audio-visual content. The online version, I certainly want to be able to feature an eclectic array of things, so that some people may think, hey, this is wilder than anything I ever saw of Henri Chopin, some poetry, or he blows a microphone, or whatever, or something like, let's say, some of the more experimental sound poems of the 50s, 60s, 70s, I'm doing stuff in Germany in 1957, probably much more interesting than the stuff happening now. But at the same time, I want things that are articulate, clever, witty, things, interviews, stuff like that. So I see that as being a supplement. It won't be vast, it won't be grand to start with, but like Werner Herzog's movie, Even Dwarfs started small. So we just build a little bit each month, and until over a year we've got a very nice archive of audio-visual material, plus some of the things we take out of the print version.
Fiona, Seizure was founded in late 2010, and I'm quoting from the website, by a small band of frustrated creatives. And I wanted to ask, what was getting you down?
I wasn't on board from the very beginning, but I know Alice and David, who started the site. Essentially, Alice was working in a sort of mainstream commercial publishing, and David in sort of a similar thing and design. And I think they both just wanted to work on the kinds of books that they wanted to read, rather than cookbooks and farm stories, essentially. And it's that's always been the thing that I've liked about it, about Seizure as an organisation, that you can tell that it's a very personal project at one level, that everything is done because someone has an interest in it, and that's what makes it such good fun. Whoa, you froze.
Yeah, not really, only apparently. You produce print editions with Seizure before you moved online, and I wondered if we could talk not about the economic imperatives of that move, but the creative consequences. Picking up on some of what Michael was saying, what's different about reading online, and how does that affect your editing?
I think it's let us do many more projects and many different projects, and I think the most interesting thing is that moving onto the online platform and running all these different projects concurrently has allowed a whole bunch of different people to come on board. So, you know, Seizure wasn't really doing poetry at all until the website started, because now there's a space for it. There's another project called Alt Text, run by a guy called Justin Wolfers, that's just for kind of, you know, alt-lit, new media projects, different ways of writing, and it's allowed us to work with different writers across different parts of Sydney and just have a really vibrant presence where new things are happening every day. And because there's so many more people involved now, all of these things are kind of happening along on the back burner, and it does allow us to have a lot more content and work with many more writers as well, which is the really exciting thing.
So are you saying it sort of opens up the curatorial rationale? Are you still looking for the same kind of thing, or are you trying to get things cross-pollinating?
I think things cross-pollinate a lot more. I've noticed that some of our writers have gotten involved in one project and then moved on to another one, and I think a similar thing happens with readers too, that they kind of get interested in one sort of work and then might kind of have a little bit of a pick around the edges of the next one and just kind of pick up on it that way. Yeah, it does allow for a lot more movement, I think.
Well, Ken, that made me think. I was wondering if some benevolent billionaire, I don't mean one, earning money from incarcerating refugees, but some benevolent billionaire came to you and offered to cover the cost of producing Cordite as a print journal and distributing it for free. Would you accept, and what would change about it?
Would we accept? I know I've made numerous vague online claims that it sure would be nice to have some unfettered money and perhaps a little bit more, which would, in the absolute value, be terrific to have $50,000 to $75,000 a year to play with, where I could pay international writers and I could pay triple or quadruple what we actually can for reviews and for poems, which kind of bring our payments on par to much more established, well-funded magazines. So that would be terrific. However, those kind of things can be a little bit perilous if there's any whiff of ceding editorial control, say to a university, say to a huge corporation. Did Reinhardt say?
We've never heard of anything like that.
Yeah, that would be a shame, and I would be extremely wary of doing that. So I would have to assess the situation very cautiously, and I'd say it would be probably more unlikely than likely.
Right, but I mean, say, if the benevolent billionaire came along, would you stay online and direct more money to your contributors? Are you saying, yes. Or would you choose to go back to
I think
print
at this point, Cordite has been online since 1999 or 2000. It was Australia's second online literary publication ever. Jacket was the first, and so I'm interested in doing maybe a once or twice off print special or something similar, but I don't think we would ever do each issue in print again. We're definitely known in the online space, so there wouldn't be any of that, but yes, payments would quadruple, and that would be terrific. I mean, everyone, it's great that we can pay everyone who contributes. I'd like to be able to pay the masthead and the producer of the site a bit more, and even myself. That would be a nice thing. But
if you run into a billionaire, let us know.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'll spread the word.
I'm sure. Michelle, how did Mascara start?
Well, it started in 2007. I published a book of poetry, and I could see that there really wasn't a great space for a lot of all kinds of diverse representations. So it was discussions between myself and Kim Cheng Bowie. And so the idea of Mascara grew out of that as a platform for Asian Australian writing. And it soon became evident that a lot of the journals were tokenising the representations of migrant writing and multicultural writers. And one of the things that became apparent was that what we needed to do was to foster and nurture a space for discourse, and that was sort of in crisis. So that was the way we moved. We started out with very humble beginnings, and it's still a very competitive situation where there are a lot of kind of inherent structural biases, so that these are things that we're negotiating progress around, and so that's, in answer to your question, that's how the journal started out,
Michelle, what surprised you from developing it from that starting out?
What surprised me?
Yeah. I mean, in the intervening time, what kinds of changes and surprises have you come up against?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I hadn't really anticipated was the way in which the digital platform is really can really expand poetry audiences and literary audiences in general. I really never expected us to expand our readership the way that we have. It's read in 65 countries, and we can see the statistics, the individual page statistics, and they really they reflect not just people flicking onto the site, but actually engaging with the site, and we can see the kinds of things that are interesting readers, what they want to read. It's not necessarily established writers. So anyway, that expands of the audience in a way that I never anticipated when I first started the journal. It was actually a matter of commissioning poets. So I was writing to poets and saying, hey, I've started this journal, would you like to contribute? And so that's been very exciting. We've kind of had this, we've kind of tried to publish around about 75% of Australian writers and 25% of writers from Asia or from other countries, North America, the UK, what have you, Europe. So and that's worked well. It's a wonderful way, I think, for Australian writers to share and have that exchange, and as well, it's also a nice opportunity for writers from other countries to get to know our local writers. So they were the main things. I really never expected. I think the digital platform is really just it makes sense. It's so much, and especially now with iPhones and Androids and so forth. Really, it's wonderful to be able to for people to access writing in this way, and I think it's the way it's going. And I think one of the things we haven't really tapped into as much is we could have used the audiovisual multimedia more, so I'm hoping that that's a direction that we can take the journal into increasingly. One of the things that I've been pleased about is publishing translations and encouraging Australian translators to contribute, and translators from other countries as well. So that's been nice to do that. Enjoyed that. Yeah. But mainly, the main thing I think that I'm very interested in is getting the discourse, and I think that's a space that's really in crisis for literature of diversity, really. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think maybe we could talk a bit about the role of the editor and what we actually do when we're editing work, because I sort of wanted to throw around the idea, I don't know, I think some people think that editors are people who tidy up a house in a way, and I'm wondering whether what you're saying is that what you're doing as an editor is creating a place for the house to be built. And I was thinking, Fiona, of some quite playful things that you've done where you've commissioned works in a way by asking poets, for instance, to fill in sonnets from end rhymes and so on. So I'm wondering what you're looking to foster when you set challenges like that.
Sorry, I lost the part of your question there.
Oh,
I lost the end of it to the demons of the internet.
Oh, sorry, demon. We didn't pay our respects to the demons of the. I was just asking what you were trying to foster when you set things, tasks, challenges like that.
Playfulness, essentially. I guess my particular frustration, my particular creative frustration that really kind of propelled me to try and get a bit more involved with the Seizure crew was I wanted to make poets work a little bit harder or force them to think differently and have a bit of a play around with these projects, but also to treat the poetry side of the magazine the same way as the prose side is treated. I think a lot of the time in some of the journals that do both poetry and prose, the poetry is either kind of cordoned off in a little section on its own, or sort of, interspersed throughout, but it doesn't have the same sort of thematic links or a proper integration into what that particular issue of the journal is doing. And I really wanted the poetry to work with the same sense of fun and play and excitement that goes on throughout the rest of the magazine. I also, most of the projects, let's face same as everybody, I think, are drawn from things that I'm interested in. Just ideas that I thought were a lot of fun. And I also had particular poets in mind who I wanted to work with and was thinking of ways that I'd like to push them a little bit, which I think is one of the great things that editors can do when they know writers well, and when they know their work well, is really try and get them to extend themselves in ways that they might not want to under their own steam.
Yeah. Do you do that, Ken?
I guess we do that. I mean, we've got nearly every issue we have a theme, which is a constraint in itself. We have a theme of a constraint right now, and many of our themes are actually deeply unpopular, and we get a lot of contact about that, and there's quite a bit of, I wouldn't say vitriol, but there's a lot of pushback about, why can't you just take poems as they are? No questions asked. Judge them on their own thing, and that's fine. We did bend a little bit on that, and we do a no themed issue every year. But it does actually produce some really interesting, diverse, bizarre creatures out there that's actually a joy to publish that probably never would exist otherwise. So we won't be dropping the theme constraint anytime soon. They've been a little bit complex of late, so I might throw some easier ones out there. But yeah, it's interesting to see who actually shows up and submits to any particular theme. It's nearly never who you kind of are fishing for, actually.
Oh, interesting. I wondered, in a way, one of the things that people talked about when online journals were taking off was the difficulty of creating a sort of identity online, because there aren't really clearly demarcated boundaries. Once you're online, you're in a state of flow and you're skipping around. Are the themed issues trying to kind of demarcate an imaginative space, do you think?
I'm kind of curious to get a reader perspective, so I'm going to toss this over to Michael. I mean, and comment on Cordite for a sentence or two. But, like, I'm curious to know what you think of a themed issue versus, the remand of being Australian.
Well, I'm not crazy about themed issues, probably point blank, partly because, as New Zealand poet Rex Fairbairn once said, "I'm older than you," and I've seen a lot of themed dishes from way back. You know, when Jim Davidson first took over the Angelo, which is a long time ago, the first issue came up with an Aboriginal flag and a different format, and that shocked people. Now, I've come up with a slightly different format for the Australian Poetry Journal, but I haven't put an Aboriginal flag there, although I would like to. But it's been done before. I mean, that's one of the missing elements to me in Australian Poetry Journal and all sorts of other places. You know, and it's not that there are Aboriginal poets out there who contribute great stuff, but, you know, this is one of the things I have to fish for, but, and I'm open for all sorts of work to come in, but I'm not going to sort of angle for themed issues, you know, because I've seen a lot, you know, architecture and all sorts of gay and queer issues and all sorts of things to do with, you know, music and art, etc., etc. I wanted, because Bronwyn had 4 themed issues before this, well, I want to open it up. First of all, I want to get as many people in as I can, writing as disparate sort of stuff as possible. And I want to do that for the next issue. I may think of something, I did propose to them way back when I was about this job, that would appeal to me. I would like to do an anti-tourism one or something like that, because it seems to me we go to places and we know what we're going to see, and I'm having to travel writing. People come back and they say, it was awful. They didn't have the sort of food we expected. And I said, what did you expect? They said, hamburgers. I said, but you were in Hong Kong for God's sake, you know, and or you were in another place, you can't do this, you know. You have to go with it and enjoy it and report on the experience as something new and refreshing and different and challenging. So I really would like to keep it open for the moment. It's partly the fact that I am hired of themes, and I've got to come up with some really interesting ones if I want them, because one of the catches with themes is that people immediately pull out something that's vaguely on that theme and send it to you, and I've had that experience before with other journals, and I think, well, yeah, nice try, but it's not really on that theme in a way that's interesting, challenging, exciting, and, you know, engages the intellectual and emotional response that I'm after in poetry.
Well, we've got a question from Twitter. This is for you, Michael. Could there be more cooperation between poetry journals and the live spoken word scene? Hint, hint.
Oh, of course it could. You know, it's self-evident that there could be. You know, I like the idea that you know, these things do not entirely occupy different spheres. I'm aware of the fact that there's another New Zealand poet, Elizabeth Smith, who says, I like to read a poem without the noise of any distraction. You know, someone's physical appearance or music, or certain things like that. There are poets who are kind of also blind or deaf. And a lot of the audio-visual stuff will make no impact on you. So, you know, special things have to happen, and I've written about that before. And I'm very fond of the way in which it engages with people with that disability. But it seems to me that obviously you're not dealing with a divide, a gap. You're dealing with the way in which a thing can develop. But I want it to be very professional in every area. So if I want to go and watch a performance, I shouldn't say anything negative about some things that I've seen recently, but in the past I have seen performances which lack any sort of engagement at all, and I walk away thinking, now why did I spend money and waste an evening doing that? Or someone was kind of doing something that's very easy, not terribly technically polished in terms of acting, singing, elocution, or anything else. The idea behind it was pretty vapid. Now, I want things which really engage me. For example, Eleanor Jackson and Thomas O'Day did a fantastic performance down in the Launceston Poetry Festival. I thought, my God, that's exactly the sort of thing I would like to see, you know, recorded and online in Jay. There are all sorts of really clever people, you know, Joel McCarrow and people like that. I think, wow, fantastic. Kelly Calliston, you know, I've got something from her for the upcoming online component of APJ. I want that sort of thing to happen. You know, if you looked at the raw text, you think, hey, what's going on here? But, you know, where's the idea? You have to see the whole experience to get it. And it really does engage you visually, orally, intellectually. That's what I want. Something that's really sophisticated. Not just, hey, look at me, you know, I'm up for screw or something. You know, sort of rather boring, you know. I mean, a lot of people can do that sort of stuff very easily. But I do want the kind of professionalism that I expect of a theatre company, of a professional musician, a professional sort of performance poet.
Does anyone else want to throw in comments on that?
I might like back to you were asking the panel about themes, and I just wanted to say that I'm with Michael a little bit that there's I quite like writing in response to themes, but we haven't chosen that, and we although we do have features, so just to remind people that we do have features, and one of the things we've tried to do with the features is present writers that would not otherwise necessarily be featured, such as at one point we did an interview with a Tibetan writer, and activist. So that was something that was just interesting and different, and so yeah, we just tried to do that, and various. Sometimes the feature may pick up on certain political nuances that might be relevant for us. I think as well, we've not wanted to necessarily copy the mainstream. One of the things we've done with our journal is to be open to the different kinds of. As an editor, I'm open to different kinds of aesthetic practice, not necessarily my own preference. I'll try and read the poem based on what I think the poet's trying to do, and what kinds of rules or whatever that he or she is setting up for themselves, and within that text of the poem, and sometimes, well, language can be an element of that. If English is not their first language, they may not necessarily be writing in a way that is necessarily particularly sophisticated at times, but what they have to say and the way they're saying it might be rhetorically or discursively arresting for me as an editor. So I'm looking for a poem that's going to somehow, it's going to surprise me, it's going to grab me, and particularly in the first few lines as well. Yeah. So, just wanted to make that point about, that, for example, in the last issue of Mascara, there was a Chinese poet, Bibi Chen, who's studying in Canberra, and her writing was interesting. It was quite truncated sort of phrases and a lot of present participles, and it was not necessarily a style that I would have selected, but it was wonderful to have something, someone who was experimenting in her own way with her own voice and ventriloquizing the language. So we've also wanted to sort of kind of challenge the language as if it is a textual thing, and it's not just one particular English, but looking at many kinds of alternative types of Englishes or whatever. We've wanted to kind of bring that into the spectrum of different voices for Australian poetry.
Yeah. Ken, I wondered, as you were saying, Cordite was one of the first to go online, and since then all these other journals have come online, and I'm wondering whether that's affected or changed your editorial policy or your vision of Cordite's role. Look at this.
Okay. I don't think it's really changed our role. I mean, it was Cordite did 3 print issues when it was still with Peter Venter and Adrian Wiggins. They were big, broad sheets. They published the likes of Les Murray, a lot of internationally famous poets, and then it kind of did a complete about-face, went online, and became very local, kind of very organic, and was that for a number of years. I think it was beginning in about 2008 or 9. We did a really big triple issue, and this was before my time, with Korean poets, and tried to extend out quite a bit there. But publishing online only is a very interesting conundrum. Yes, the space is infinite. You can have 19 or so other journals doing the same thing, but the trick is how to keep on top of that space and to still publish quality without just trying to fill up with content. And that's always an ongoing struggle with us. We're constantly getting questions about, well, why does word count really matter? When it could be 5,000 words long, and it's not really about that. It's about the editorial constraint of writing clearly and interestingly. But I think it's terrific that the online space has created the opportunity to have a lot more niche magazines and journals out there, definitely.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Answer.
Fiona, speaking of the editorial role, I was thinking about the fact that you work as poetry editor at Giramondo, as well as poetry editor at Seizure, and you're a poet who's had people edit your work. So I'm wondering how all those roles fit together. Or don't.
So do I. So do I sometimes. I've always. It's actually really energizing, and the way I like to think about it is when I first started editing, I was fairly young when I started with Giramondo, and saw my first slush pile, and just went, wow. Like everyone talks about how big these things are, but I thought that was just, hyperbole. You know what writers are like, oh, it's huge, everything's huge, but they actually are huge. And there is actually so little that you have space to select from that. And also seeing realizing that sometimes the decisions that were made did come down to personal taste, and did come down to fitting into what was already going into the magazine at this stage, or did come down to things that aren't 100% related to the work in and of itself, are both really interesting and valuable things to learn as a practitioner. I think I also learned very quickly very simple things that you can do to make an editor go, ugh, not that, and to avoid them like the plague.
Which are those?
I do think the two.
Tell us about those things.
500.
Oh, a good old-fashioned cliche in the first couple of lines. Dark and stormy nights, that kind of thing. A little bit too much teenage angst, unfiltered teenage angst. That's a killer for me. They're my particular. And outright misogyny in the first few lines is genuinely going to turn me off as well.
There's a surprising amount of that.
Yeah, there's so much. Yeah,
there's a lot of that.
You could do a themed issue.
It's amazing.
I think we'll steer clear of that
the
one.
slush pile theme.
Actually, let's keep on with this. Your editorial pet hates. Michael, to start.
Well, I think pretty much the same. The kind of unmediated sort of spilling of the guts on the page. I just see a little bit of sophistication. Why? I can't imagine Elizabeth Bishop sort of writing a poem like that, or et cetera, et cetera. There are so many people who are excellent models of how to deal with misery in a creative way. Years ago, I wrote a parody of a poem by Alec Cope when he was still alive, and I sent it to him. And he said, "Isn't it fantastic how much fun you can have when you're writing about something that's absolutely grisly?" And I thought, yes, you're right. Because there's this, a bit of humour and intelligence that comes to the fore, and I think I like to see signs of that. And if I just think it's very flat and personal, I think, well, certain other poems, about really bad situations, can handle it in a way which gives pleasure and it seems perverse, but I guess one of the things I want in poetry is the pleasure principle to come forward somehow, that you don't walk away from the poem thinking, oh my God, I'm going to read the poem again. I want people to say, I think that is bloody fine. I wish I'd said that, and I think that's what I'm looking for, and anything that falls short of that, given all I know about contemporary poetry and English and whatever other languages I happen to access, and the past, I want it to be that good. So I'm possibly setting the barrier a bit high, but I make immense allowances for sort of naivety and youth. And I have to, because I want to, one of the roles of being an editor is to bring people on. So I don't know about you other guys, but I like to write a response to every single person who says something, whether it's accepted or rejected. And I just say, hey, look, he's 17 years old, you live in a remote place. These poems far too many abstractions and you're really explaining everything far too much. Why don't you just sort of cut back a bit here and so on? So I think that's the role of the editor too, to be sympathetic to the impulse and to try and encourage people. Because you don't know, have you got some mute and glorious Milton? No, I want someone who's an articulate and glorious Milton to emerge out of that sort of experience, And that's part of the editorial thing. Maybe it's the years of teaching or something that makes me do that.
What about your pet hates, Kent?
Well, I have to say, I'm impressed that you do try to provide feedback on all the submissions. I would like to do that, and I'll fully admit that we don't do that and can't do that. We get about 1,500 poems per issue, which is a lot, and I guess were I not the chief financial officer and the janitor and the marketer and the graphic designer and everything else for Cordite, the team of one, I might have some time to do that. So that's terrific. I wish we could. We can't. So that's kind of the end of that anecdote. So what not to do? Unless you're doing visual poetry or concrete, don't send me your poems because Microsoft Word can do it in an instant. It happens all the time, and there really is. All it does is really kind of explode. You're not sure where to end your lines, and that's one of the fundamental things about writing poetry. So maybe don't do that. It's okay to have just clean cut stanzas before that. That's fine. Being an online only thing, one thing that is one of my pet peeve, but you can't really push it out there, is that when people submit poems, a lot of floating lines and spaces, that's fine. My work is riddled with that as well. But when people space their poems on the word tab function, so if you tab 2 or 3 times, oh, that looks like a good amount of space. Well, when you cut and paste that into HTML, tabbed isn't acknowledged, and so you have to redo it all over again. So if you're submitting to an online publication, or at least a Cordite, just use the space bar. It's a hard invisible character, and it works so much nicer. That's just a wee pet peeve. We get
You get poems about pet cats.
We do get a few poems about pet cats, but as you know, there's a preponderance of bird-themed poems in Australia, and I've never really quite figured out that. I think some bird poems are great, but
Robert Adamson, wasn't it?
We get maybe 40 or 50 bird poems every time, no matter what the theme is.
Hey, think they're the same people?
Well, it might be. I mean, and I have to say that the whole theme thing, take it with quite a large grain of salt. I always encourage the guest editors to interpret widely, and it invariably, I'd say 20% ignore the theme whatsoever, and maybe it'll work out for you, maybe not. I guess my only other pet peeve is that we get a number of works who are kind of invoking the muse of Pope or Byron or something, and writing in dothus, thouest, thisist, and thatis, and it's okay to be a poet of now. There's still lots of room to be individual. Yeah, so don't paint yourself as a pastiche of something that's 300 years ago. It will very rarely get up, I think, in probably most journals, maybe not all, but that's something that happens actually quite a lot.
Have you had a H.P. Lovecraft poem?
Probably.
I was just thinking of that archaism, that death on wheels.
There really is no need to engineer a fusty archaism. No, there's no need.
Michelle, what about your pet peeves?
Yeah, well, I guess just following on from that, the archaisms, I really don't like evangelical poems, so I just completely zone out of that. I agree with Kent. HTML isn't as powerful as Microsoft, so that's definitely a word. So that's definitely one of the limitations of digital publishing. So very often those kinds of reasons are why we may not select a poem, which is, I just don't have that technical expertise, and we're all solutions around that. There are definitely limitations. Other pet hates, I'm a bit soft, really, but I am looking for poems which I feel like, there's so much data and information and communications that we're kind of bombarded with, that I do really like a poem that stops me in some way, that isn't just, sort of an array of images, as if it's like a movie camera or something like that, but actually stops me, and I guess that is a particular sort of quality in a poem that I value. So that's a poem that I'm likely to want to select as well. Yeah, just that moment. And also I think I'd like a poem to be dynamic. Yeah, in different ways. Yeah. Did you hear that?
I think we did. Sorry, we can't hear that, Michelle.
I think I just said that I like the poem to be dynamic. It's sort of static in some way. Like it might be very good, but if it's not sort of, if it's not maybe doing something extra in some way on its own terms, whatever type of poem it is, then I'm less likely to select it. I don't know, I can't think of any other pet hates at the moment.
One of the things, Michael, I wanted to ask you about with the Australian Poetry Journal is the way you've got art in there. And I wanted to ask about your curating of the art, what you're looking for and how the art works in with the poetry.
Well, I think visual things operate on appeal to a different sense altogether. But I want the journal to look kind of nice, feel good, feel beautiful, and I don't like poor design. And I like the fact that I'm working with some people who have excellent design. Stuart Geddes is a fantastic sort of designer. He uses really interesting fonts and spacing. And as for and headings and all the rest of it, and I do want to emphasize that, okay, this is Australian journal. I'm going to use Australian art on it. I'm going to put it on the front. I don't want to rip something off the web and pretend, it's something I couldn't be bothered chasing up. I want the illustration on the cover to be arresting. I want the heading up top, so if it's on a bookshelf, people can see it. And I want to give a credit to every single person associated with the graphics inside it. So the photographers, the artists, The cover artists all get a Guernsey on the back, you know, with the credits, and they all get paid. Now that is unusual, I think, and I just wanted to be a point, because years ago I edited an anthology of Australian humour, and the publishers did not include credits for all the graphic artists, and I was mortified. I couldn't believe they did something like that, because they had these important Australian artists in photography and black and white art and cartooning and all the rest of it. And you know, I felt like a hero. I had to suddenly talk to about 50 people who contributed stuff, and I thought, never again, never again. I will always honor professionalism of that sort. So if I have a journal, I want it to look beautiful, I want it to be interesting, varied, to flick through. If there's an article or an interview with a particular writer, I want a photograph of the person, I want the credit to be there for the photographer. So it's not as if I'm seeing a separation of things, but I want the images to be integral with the feel of the journal, the look of the journal. So it has to feel good in the hand, look good to the eye. And I think graphics that do that, you know, in a poetry or literary journal, really boost. You know, some of my models include things like Chicago Poetry or the Paris Review, etc. I like that, you know. You don't know what you're going to get. You open it up, wow, there's a photograph of the person who's being interviewed or written about. So, you know, I think that that's one of the things that's kind of missing. I know that over the years, the ancients have done a bit of this, and that in recent times, you know, perhaps Sotheby's come into that area. I think Overland was always pretty good. I think a couple of other journals. Yeah, but I wanted to make it a feature that, okay, I don't want this to be a nationalist project, but I would like to think that the people would see interesting poems by Australia and Australians' experience. And that's not to say I don't want stuff from America or Canada or anywhere else as well. I want the lot, you know. If someone sends me a good poem, I don't care where it's from. But with the graphics, I think, you know, it would be nice to say, you've never seen this. Have a look. Ooh.
That makes well, I think.
We've got a question from Leanne Lowe. How do editors engage with diversity? Michelle, I think in a way you've responded to that already. But Fiona, I don't think you've commented on that. Is that a particular goal of yours, to engage with diversity?
Not a particular goal. You know, we're only just starting out with poetry and Seizure, so I do encourage anyone and everybody to start sending things our way. But I think you know, going from sort of the projects that I've worked on before and the work with Giramondo in particular, that I think Michelle was sort of talking about this a little bit too, that engaging, that sort of engagement is about being aware of accented Englishes in a way, and different ways of using language and different reading backgrounds that people might, you know, reading and literary backgrounds that people are coming from, and the different different traditions of storytelling and how they might be impacting on a poem. And it really is about being aware of what the poem is trying to do, poet and poem are trying to do in and of themselves, and trying to come to things without preconceptions as much as possible. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And we've been talking really almost exclusively, I suppose, about the poetry editing that we do, but Ken, I'm thinking about the other role that you play, where you're assigning reviews and you're selecting reviews, and I know there are reviews in the Australian Poetry Journal, so thinking of that, of diversity and how you handle that, picks up on the notion of reviewing. Do you want to comment on that, Ken?
Yeah, when I started at Cordite about 3.5 years ago, most of the masthead in place have been in there for about anywhere between 5 and 10 years, and I think we're getting a little bit exhausted, and that's absolutely fair enough. We were kind of relying on people approaching us of interest for reviews, and I totally turned that on its head. So I tried to expand as wide as possible as I could to get new reviewers in, to get new voices in, to cover a much wider range of books from a much wider range of small presses. So now we probably have a stable of about 30 to 40 reviewers from from every state and territory in Australia, and I actively chose to do that. And sometimes some have worked out better than others, but most have been on par quite good. And it's the diversity has increased amazingly, and it's actually surprising when you actually reach out and ask somebody the reception that you'll get, instead of just waiting around for people to come to you, which I think is actually very problematic and a sure sign of withering on the vine. We definitely have done that for sure in terms of reviews, but I've reached out internationally as much as I have could, and I've even changed kind of the tagline of the journal. We're an Australian and international journal of poetry and its criticism. So we do a lot of translations for each issue. We have some international reviewers. I was really surprised at how well known Cordite was when I got there 3 years ago. That there's 40,000 readers in Europe or in North America. I really was quite surprised by that. And that ties back into a number of things, but being online, being free, that really kind of facilitates that. But yeah, diversity is one of the tenets of what we do.
We're coming to the end of our hour, I think. Michael, I wanted you to give a sense of what your approach is with reviewing.
It's actually rather similar. I want people from all over to be reviewing things from either at home or else abroad. So we might have someone writing a review of Joel Simich or something like that. I think that's fine. I want Australians to review New Zealanders and all sorts of things to be happening across. I kind of deliberately angled, a bit like Kent does, to get someone from Western Australia to review someone from Tasmania and someone from here to do something from there across the country. So I didn't want to set up cliques, coteries, in-groups, or boys' own adventures or girls' own sort of clubs, and I'm like Kent, I'm angling for people who are good reviewers, and as all of us would realise, I think, there are some really terrific reviewers in Australia of poetry, as there are of prose and art and music and such other things. But and we have to share them around in a sense, We're always on the lookout for someone who comes up really interesting. So if someone makes a pitch and says, "How about I write a review of this?" I'll say, "Okay, try and let's see what happens." It could be very disappointing, or it could be miraculous.
Yeah.
I'm going to use that person again and again. But not in every issue necessarily. So, we're looking for diversity, and as we're looking for diversity of voices in general, and diversity of backgrounds and experiences.
As we're almost at the end of the time, I wondered whether everyone could cheer us out with a sense of an editor who maybe has made a big difference in their lives. What makes a great editor is really what I'm asking. Michelle, have you had an editor of your own work who's made a difference?
Actually, yes. I just recently. Should I say who it is? I think James Lay is a really fantastic editor. So I'm really enjoying Sydney Review of Books. I think it's a wonderful publication, and he provides feedback, and it's really rare to get that kind of feedback. I think where you actually can improve your work and where there's a real engagement. I think we're very busy as editors, so we often don't have the time. Could I also just say one more thing about diversity, please? Yes. I just want to say that one of the things that we wanted to do right from the we were determined to do with Mascara is to not make diversity quarantined, and not to make it not to make our diversity ghettoized. And so we've always had writers from different backgrounds, Anglo-Celtic, as majority Anglo-Celtic, and as many writers of diverse backgrounds as well. I hope that's the way that many journals will take that lead, because I think that time for multiculturalism being ghettoised is something that can be contested now in a much more activist kind of literary representations. Yeah, so I just wanted to mention that because it was nice of Leanne to raise it.
Great. Thank you. Fiona, what about you, a great editor?
Well, there's probably no surprise. I've worked most with Ivor Indig for, gosh, a long time now, and he's been terrific both as an editor, and I think because he runs sort of a small operation, he's fiercely, he's a champion of his writers. Really looks after the people in his stable, and I think that's a really wonderful thing, and I feel very, very lucky to be involved in that.
What about you?
Well, I'm immensely lucky, and my answer is my partner, or Jessica, my wife, has definitely taught me more about editing and what to do than anybody else by far. And like, I'm a managing editor of a magazine, and that kind of means spinning the plates, doing the admin, doing 5,000 emails a year, all of that janitorial stuff. Some of it's fun, some of it's just a lot of work. But her role and her flavor of editorial is to take a messy manuscript and turn it into a beautiful book. And that is a unique art unto itself, which is very unsung and immensely hard to do. And I have tapped into her knowledge constantly, which makes me look a whole lot better. And it's definitely, I could chalk 99% of that up to living with this person and learning from her as well. So she managed to have a fruitful relationship getting John Kinsella's short stories out into the public, so I think she's onto something.
No
What
comment.
a champion.
Yeah.
We might finish with Michael's answer to this question. Michael, a great editor, his influence, maybe.
Influence. Well, in Australia, Carl Harrison Ford was a very fine editor. Wrote some other people's prose. Editors I admire, well, George Plimpton stands head and shoulders above the rest in the Paris Review, all the work he did there.
What about?
Just a good eye for what was quality, what was worth saying, and who said it well, and he asked all the right questions when he did his interviews. Apart from that, well, I have a partner too, Winifred Bourne, who's brilliant as a proofreader, editor, etc. And I am very fortunate to have someone like that hag-riding my stuff and saying, "Run it again." And that reminds me of the great story about Swinburne and asked by Benjamin Jowett to help with editing those dialogues. You look up every now and then and say, "Another howler, master." I think that's very good, you know. And I think you're very fortunate if you've got an in-house editor like that.
Yes.
So we might all peel off and have a glass of wine and say goodbye, but this was to launch the Australian Poetry Journal 4.1 and Michael Sharkey. So thank you to all the editors who've come.
And thank you to everyone, and hi Michelle, and hi Fiona. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Good night.